Okay, Claudia, can you hear me? Okay, can you guys hear me okay? All right, good. Good to hear. Since we had that glitch, I'm going to wait just a little bit and let people try to find their way back. One of you, if you could type into the text whether you had to leave and come back in, or if I just disappeared and then I came back. Also, can you see the slide that says what nutrients are essential now? Okay, good. I'm gonna go ahead and get going again. I was talking about the primary, secondary, and trace nutrients, and the 16 main ones that we've always pointed to as being the nutrients that are essential. Over on the right, you'll see that it says for some plants there are 5 more nutrients that we probably need to add to the list. Now, there is some debate about some of these. These are nutrients that might be necessary in one particular function in some plants, and so will the plant grow without it? Yes. Would the plant, let's say, produce seed or a viable seed, for example, or something? Maybe not. And so that term essential is kind of debated, but in general, you can say we need 16 nutrients in order for plants to grow, to live and grow, and then just recognize that there are another 5 that we currently are aware of that have very important functions that in some cases could be considered also to be essential. Can you tell me now if that slide has changed since we had trouble changing the first time? Do you now see the blue and the yellow? Get an answer from somebody there. So, oops, excuse me, I changed it on you. Okay, good. So what I'm going to move forward then without pausing anymore. I'm assuming everything's working. What percentage of a plant's dry weight comes from the soil? Well, this is kind of a surprise. Because when you think about the 3 elements, carbon, which the plant gets from carbon dioxide in the air, so it's a gas, hydrogen from the air, and oxygen from the air, those 3 represent 95% of the weight of a plant, which is incredible. All the nutrients that we think of as nutrients maybe that we would need to fertilize or to add to the plant or the plant gets from the soil, that only accounts for 5% of the whole plant's weight. And that's just kind of a fun fact that I wanted to throw in there, but I think that's really interesting to see how that particular works. One of the causes of nutrient deficiency, the first one we're going to talk about, is just the lack of the nutrient in the soil. Many years ago, in fact back in the early 1900s, there was a lot of studies done on nutrients and plant growth and yield. And something called Liebig's barrel became sort of an analogy or a graphic to help us understand something. And that is that the nutrient that's in the shortest supply is what limits plant growth. So if you think of this barrel, and the question is how much water will it hold, whatever stave is the shortest, that's as full as you can make the barrel. So that's as much yield or production as you could get from a plant. And so having extra potassium or extra phosphorus or extra sulfur doesn't matter if, in terms of getting more out of a plant, if magnesium or calcium or some other element is in limited supply. And a lot of times people don't think about that, but balance is really, really important. We often misfertilize because not understanding not only the importance of this concept, but also nutrient balance. And I'm going to talk about that briefly as well. The second cause of nutrient deficiency is that the soil pH is out of range. Each nutrient can be present in the soil, but as pH moves toward acidic or toward basic, that nutrient becomes more or less available. So let's look at iron, for example. This is the red one kind of in the middle of the chart. In low pH range, the iron that is present is quite available. But once you get up about 7.5 and certainly 8 and higher, the iron is there, but it's not available because the pH has moved out of range and it's gone into a form that the plants can't get a hold of and use for their uptake. So pH is very important. In fact, you can think of changing the pH as having the effect of fertilizing your plants. And we've seen that in cases where we lower the pH or we raise the pH and we start to see a response because the nutrients were there, they just weren't available. The next cause of nutrient deficiency is the nutrients not being in balance in the soil. And so, for example, some nutrients work well together. The presence of calcium and phosphorus together at the right ratio helps in the uptake into the plant. That would be called synergism. They get along together and they help each other. We have the same kind of thing with potassium and nitrogen in your lawn. In the fall, we would like to get potassium into the plant because that's one of the things that helps prepare it for winter hardiness. It's kind of think of it as a component of the antifreeze that helps the plant during cold spells. Well, when you have a little nitrogen along with the potassium, the uptake of the potassium is better in the plant. And so that's another synergism. Then there's antagonisms where they compete. So if you have excessive iron, you can actually prevent enough manganese from getting into a plant, or vice versa. Then there's the form of the nutrient that's affected by other elements in the soil. And for example, when your phosphorus gets really high, a lot of the iron becomes unavailable, and the iron phosphate, the combination there, can actually, the phosphorus is preventing the plant from having access to the iron. And then I mentioned pH levels making nutrients unavailable, but I also I threw this in here to help me remember to say it, and that's plant genetics. Plants differ in their ability to take up nutrients. And sometimes it's certainly true between species. You compare a Texas mountain laurel to an azalea, and they are not equally adept at taking up iron in various pHs of the soil. But even sometimes within varieties, we see some differences. And so these are all results of nutrient imbalances, another cause of that nutrient deficiency. Here's a pepper plant that has a zinc deficiency, but it's because of excessive phosphorus and the zinc not making it up into the plant. Some of our soil and crop scientists shared this one with me. And so when you look at that, you say, well, that plant, let's just say you knew that plant needed zinc. It's not that there's no zinc there, it's that there's too much phosphorus present. So on the left is an iron deficient St. Augustine. Now the question is why? When you see those yellow streaks through your St. Augustine lawn, that typically will happen during the summertime, or excuse me, the early springtime. And once we get into summer and things start growing, I see it often disappear. Now the iron didn't go up and down, but the availability of the iron went up and down. Cold soils, oversaturated, soggy soils, anything that damages the root tip of the grass plant, iron is taken up primarily in the region out near the end of the root. So any of those things can affect it. You can see iron deficiency clearly on the picture on the right. A healthy green grass blade, or when you see the green and yellow streaking through that St. Augustine, when you pull a yellow leaf and hold it up to the sky and look at it, and you can see real clearly the symptoms of that iron deficiency. Let's see, where were we? Imbalances in the soil. Okay, dry soil conditions, poorly aerated soil conditions. That would mean soggy, wet soil conditions. And then root restrictions from containers can also affect the nutrient availability. And what I'm going to do here is go through a series of slides. Here is phosphorus deficiency on some transplants, some cruciferous or cold crop transplants. You can see the purplish color on the leaves. Their roots are confined by those little tiny six-pack cells, and as a result they just aren't able to take up enough nutrients. You can push growth by fertilizing with nitrogen, for example, but without the phosphorus you run into that kind of a deficiency. Another thing that I would like to mention is when we were talking about the root restrictions is just the root injury, or anything that damages a root or blocks the nutrient and the flow of nutrients through the plant. And a good example of block translocation might be something like a girdling plant. A lot of times trees are grown in small containers. Let's say you planted an oak acorn in a gallon pot and left it there for a few years, and those roots began to go around the pot, and then you move it to a larger pot and a larger pot. Well, those roots never unwind, and as the root gets bigger and the trunk gets bigger, the two come together, and now you've got a strangling root around the base of that tree, and that affects movement of moisture and nutrients as well. So all of these things, lack of nutrients, soil pH out of range, imbalance, soil conditions that are too dry or poorly aerated, and I should have said more about that one. That means that there's, for example, oversaturated soil where the roots can't get oxygen. That's going to affect nutrient uptake as well. But these are all causes, and they're not the only causes of nutrient deficiency, but they are some of the common ones that you'll run into. Let's look at root injury. So this first picture on the left, we have a number of pre-emergent herbicides that we call DNA herbicides. I believe it's dinitroaniline, I believe I'm saying that right. And the way they work is they cause the cell division at the root tip to get all messed up, and instead of growing a long slender root that reaches into the soil, that root becomes clubbed. And these are used in turf a lot. They're labeled for turf, but when they're overused and misused, we get root clubbing. And look at that St. Augustine grass. I don't know if you can see here, but look at the club, that root and this root. All these roots are clubbed. Now, if you've got a runner of your grass and maybe the older parts of the runner are dead, or maybe a disease like take-all has killed them, and your new roots are coming out and they can't get a root down because of the presence of that herbicide at the soil surface, you start to see nutrient deficiencies, but it's because the root injury has prevented the plants from being able to get a hold of those nutrients. Take-all root rot is a good example of that. It does kill roots. And we see a lot of samples where when the sample comes in, there's not a living root on the whole runner. Maybe a new white root right out at the end trying to come out and start, but take-all can create nutrient deficiencies. And one of the signs of take-all is the yellowing. It's not the only thing that causes yellowing in St. Augustine, but that's kind of what's going on there. And here's some okra, nematodes. Look at that root system. Can you imagine? I'll just grab this one and drag it out where you can really see it here. Look at imagine water and nutrients trying to flow through that kind of a mess. That kind of root injury has the effect of also creating some nutrient problems for the plant. As we try to get out and diagnose our nutrient deficiencies, one of the first questions is that nutrient translocatable? Can the plant move it? And in the case of, we'll use this little image here, there's 4 nutrients, primarily 4 nutrients that are the main ones that the plant can move from older leaves to new leaves. So if the plant grows this leaf and puts the nitrogen and magnesium or potassium in it, and then the plant grows and starts to run into a deficiency, it can steal those nutrients from the older foliage to support new growth. So as a result, we see the nutrient deficiency on the older leaves first. For other plant nutrients, like in this case iron, sulfur would be another example of one that can cause yellowing. The plant can't move them. So while it built these healthy leaves earlier in that shoot's growth with plenty of iron, as that plant begins to grow and there's not enough iron available, the new growth shows it. And you can see here the red tip photinia is showing some significant iron deficiency as you go from new leaves that are almost white all the way down into older leaves that have the green veins, but the interveinal areas are yellowing. And if we went further back, here's an old leaf right up here in the top right corner that's fully green. The iron is there, but the plant can't steal it to support new growth. So just looking at where do you see the nutrient deficiencies first helps you get in the right category of nutrients and eliminate some of the ones from the mix. Now that doesn't mean that nitrogen deficiency doesn't show up on new growth. If you get low enough in nitrogen, that whole plant is going to lack color. But it's just to say that early in the process, that's something that we can notice. Magnesium is another mobile. Here is a pepper plant that has magnesium deficiency. It has stolen from the old leaves and it has moved the magnesium to the new growth. Here's a shoot here and here's some up here that are healthier. Here is a citrus plant with magnesium deficiency, and I like this image because one of the characteristics of a magnesium deficiency is while there is some interveinal yellowing, you also tend to get an arrowhead or a Christmas tree of green inside the leaf, and you can see it on these citrus leaves, kind of that distinct pattern. I've seen that a lot on red tip photinias and roses as well. So magnesium deficiency, the plant is stealing it from old leaves to support the new leaves. And so how do you determine, what the problem is there? Well, you could send a soil test off. You could have tissue analysis done, which would look at the actual leaf itself and tell you what's in the leaf, which is really helpful because a soil test tells you what's in the soil, but it doesn't necessarily tell you if that is able to get into the leaf or not, where a tissue analysis would. You could also take, in this case, some Epsom salt. Epsom salt has magnesium, and dissolve some in water, pour it around the bottom of that one plant, and just watch and see if you see a response of some improvement. I've heard of dipping some leaves into Epsom salt's water before. There's some complications there. You don't want to mix it too strong. Some leaves are waxy and don't take things up as well. But that would just be a way kind of to test out and see what it is. And then here's nitrogen deficiency. It's a mobile. Now I put a question mark by nitrogen deficiency, and I would like to have some of you engage, if you would. So hey, thanks for adding that comment about olive trees in. That's very good. The nitrogen deficiency, you would look at this first picture. That happens to be gardenia, and the older leaves are yellow, but the new leaves are green. So we would say, well, that's something that's been stolen from the older leaves to feed the new leaves. So we're going to guess nitrogen there. Here's some Madagascar periwinkles, one of our favorite summer flowers, and look at all the yellowing on the older leaves. but not so much really on the new leaf. So they've either been growing without nitrogen for a while, and it's pretty severe, or maybe something else is going on. And I throw this in here because I'm showing you a lot of pictures of how to assess nutrient deficiencies. But if you go online and Google, what does, well, we'll use the comment that Stephen made in about magnesium. What does magnesium deficiency look like? Well, if you see a corn leaf, that strappy grass-like corn leaf, it's going to look one way. If you see a citrus leaf, it's going to look different. And then Stephen was mentioning in olive trees, it shows up as a banding on the leaf where the tip is yellow, the middle is green, and the base is yellow. And so don't just look and memorize these things, because it gets a little more complicated than that. And so, for example, this gardenia, there's one other possibility of what's going on here. It could be that these leaves, when they were growing, when that plant was starting growth, there was an iron deficiency for whatever reason. Soggy wet soil, cold soil, maybe just a lack of iron in the soil. And then let's say that condition improved, or they put an iron chelate down to supply it. Now there's iron for the new leaves to have. So this one throws you because it ends up being backwards. It's the old foliage grew at a time when there wasn't iron, and now the new foliage is growing at a time when there is iron. So you see what I'm saying? It can be a little tricky, but I'm giving you a lot of information to kind of understand how these things work. So as you look at your plants, you can think through it and not just go, oh, here's the poster image of what that particular nutrient might look like. Another deficiency we run into in the garden is calcium deficiency, which when calcium doesn't reach the tip of the fruit, the farthest end from where the tomato attaches and receives its nutrients from, that the cells there die, and then they begin to rot away. And this happens to the earliest tomatoes worse. It can happen anytime, but I find that the first few that set, the plant doesn't have as good of a root system early on. Maybe it's a new transplant. And maybe if you're growing it in a confined container, remember we said that confining roots can exacerbate nutrient deficiencies because the plant doesn't have this large volume of soil to mine nutrients from. So we always watch for blossom end rot, especially on those first fruits of the season, where it tends to be a little bit worse. The number one way to diagnose nutrient deficiencies for the home gardener is to start with a soil test. We can't emphasize that enough. You take a good sample that's representative of the soil that the plant roots are in, and you send it into the lab, and they give you results something like this. They've changed it a little bit over the years, the way the results look, but it shows you the critical level here is a dotted line, and then it gives you the nutrients levels for all of these, and then the fertilizer recommendations. And there's actually at the bottom of the page there would be more information on fertilizer recommendations. I will say something about soil tests. Nitrogen is often low. It's a very volatile element. It can wash away in excessive moisture, excessive rainfall or irrigation. It can volatilize into a gas and be lost that way. It cycles in the soil. A lot of nitrogen goes into the bodies of the microbes as they're decomposing the high carbon organic matter, and then as they die, it's released back into the soil again. And so it cycles a lot. And that's just to say that I don't ignore nitrogen, but I always figure you need to add it as the plant grows. Some plants, like legumes, less so much, but others are heavy nitrogen feeders like corn. And yield is directly and significantly tied to adequate nitrogen levels in the soil. You just want to, as we were talking about balances, we would like these things not to get high. Phosphorus, I have seen thousands of soil tests over my career, literally, and phosphorus is almost always high, and it doesn't go away. It ties up to the soil very tightly, and so if you have high phosphorus now, if your phosphorus levels approach this last line now, you need to put in your will for your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren to never add phosphorus to the soil, because it's still going to be there. But seriously, we don't need to be adding phosphorus most of the time. There are crops that it's especially important in. There are certain parts of plant functioning that it's very important in flowering and fruiting for sure, and what root development and other things. But all these nutrients are critical, but we tend to overdo the phosphorus because over the years it builds up. When I started as an extension agent, lawn fertilizing recommendations were often triple 13 and triple 10. That's the same ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Too much phosphorus. You do that for 10 years and it just builds up. And plants don't take up nutrients in a 1-1-1 ratio. They take them up in more like a 3-1-2 ratio or something somewhere in that range. And so we need to fertilize accordingly. Let's see. So we're getting kind of toward the end here. So I want to just throw this out there, and I would like some of you to comment, if you would, in the chat. Please don't be shy. So look at these trees. These are all red oak trees. This is at a parking lot in a shopping center in Austin, Texas, and they were all planted about the same time. This one is green as emerald colored green as you can get. These two on the sides are very yellow. Why? What would you diagnose? What would you want to know? What question would you ask? What would you check out? Anybody want to be brave and take a stab at it in the chat? Well, I thought we'd have a few brave souls. Either I lost everybody and you guys left a long time ago, or people are shy. There we go. Where is the concrete? That's a good question, Marilyn. Well, the concrete is close. It's on both sides. Now, the amount of soil that they have is somewhat limited because that is an island. It's not very large. But the thing that I find curious is, why is this tree green and this tree yellow? They're in the same soil. They're both equidistant from the concrete, which, might very gradually leach a little bit of calcium, raising the pH a little bit right in the place where soil and concrete come together. All right. Well, I'm assuming we're not going to get any more. Oh, there we go. I just wasn't looking. A root problem, Claudia. That's good. Iron deficiency. Yes, it is iron deficiency. Check for root problems. Girdling roots. Stephen is nailing a good one there. Could be lacking magnesium. Okay, I like all these. I can tell people have been listening. The water source. Okay. Well, all your guesses are good points and good guesses, and you're thinking right. Yeah, it is good thinking. But keep in mind, they're all in the same soil, pretty much here. Brad got close. Actually, Brad and I think Stephen probably came the closest to it. These oaks are not all from the same region. We have oaks like Shumard that do well in East Texas. They're a beautiful red oak in areas with moderate to, let's say, lower pH soils. But when you get up in the Texas Hill Country, we have some red oaks that grow up in the limestone hills in the escarpment that are very used to growing in a high pH soil. I mentioned this was Austin, Texas. The soil is a higher pH over there. And part of the difference is, I suspect that these are not all from the same seed source. That either they bought them from different suppliers. That could be, one could be a Shumard, the other one. But there's also the question about pin oak. Pin oak is one that is very intolerant of that. So that would be the genetics of the plant, which we talked about earlier, being a factor. And then I think Stephen mentioned the girdling root. And sure enough, when you get out here, some of these plants had a root so far embedded in the trunk that it was like an anaconda wrapped around something, choking it to death. And as that root grows and as the trunk grows, there's just no room for the flow from the roots to get up to the top or vice versa. And that affected it. And they ended up going in here and taking out every other damaged plant in order to get it to recover. But I throw that in there. It's a little bit of a curveball, but nature always throws us curveballs. And so be real careful about jumping to conclusions when you're looking at nutrient deficiencies. Remember that you have the soil test, and remember too, if you have a high dollar crop, and I suspect probably most of you are homeowners looking at home and garden, but if you have something that is significant, let's say you have a peach orchard or something like that, you can do tissue analysis of the leaves, and along with the soil test, that helps you make some assessments. It helps you play Sherlock Holmes a little bit better and know what to do for your plants. I have here let's see. This is a number of different things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post in chat here each of these. So those of you who would like, if they will post, here we go. The Essential Nutrients for Plant is a publication that Tony Proven, who runs the Soil Lab, put together along with, I'm trying to think of who else assisted him in that one. The next one is a fertilizer calculator, and this one is really handy. The fertilizer calculator will allow you, when that soil test comes in, and it will allow you to determine how much of the fertilizers do I need to purchase in order to and apply in order to get the right amount of nutrients in the ground. And then let me give you one more now, and this is the soil testing. So you guys can just click on chat and you have access to these things. You don't have to type out those horrible long URLs. One thing about soil testing, when you go, if you are a homeowner and you're doing it for your garden or doing it for your yard and landscape, you want to choose the urban soil test farm. I don't care if you live in the country 10 miles out from Marfa, Texas. If it's your yard, choose the urban soil test form, because that one is geared toward, you tell it, well, I have it's a rose bed, or it's a vegetable garden, or it's my lawn, and so it's more suitable in the way it's presented than the one that would be more used for a farm, for a hay pasture or something like that, more agricultural than horticultural. So that, I believe, is all that I have on today. Our Wednesdays typically run a little shorter, except when Murphy's Law gets tangled up in technology like we did today. But if you have any other questions, if you would put them into chat, I'd be happy to comment on them. And we have some of our extension horticulturists and aggie horticulture specialists in various fields that are also online that can answer those as well. There was a question earlier, and it was way back. And let me go back. I was going to try to answer that. Someone asked about. Oh, it was in the previous. It's not in this chat anymore. Someone asked about, how do I get plant samples identified or get help with a problem like that? Well, you certainly can email a picture to your county extension office. And they can take the image in the email and take a look at it. You can send plant samples for diseases to the state plant clinic. They're not going to diagnose for nutrients, but if it may be involving a disease, you could do that. There is an e-extension that some of the county offices participate in, where you can go online and fill out the form and do it that way. But I will say, when you take samples and take pictures, always make sure your picture's in good, sharp focus. And in the case of nutrient samples, get a picture of the whole plant and the yard around it. And in the case of nutrient samples, get another picture of the leaves up close, and maybe the top and the bottom of the leaf. There are some kinds of conditions that may just occur on the top of the leaf, not necessarily nutrient related. And so being able to see the whole leaf close up, something very, very indicative. And then a little bit close up on the plant. I showed you the pictures where we could see the new growth was yellow and the old growth was green, or actually see the pattern in the green. And so those are all tips to help your extension agent or extension specialist help you better with your questions. All right, I'm gonna hang around for about another minute here if we got any questions. If not, we're gonna go ahead and close down. All right, well, looks like we still have about 54 folks on, but they're starting to drop. So I'm going to assume we're done with the questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and thank you for joining us. Don't forget that Aggie Horticulture, we have presentations on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock, and let's see, there was someone asked for an email, so please do join us for another Friday or Wednesday one, because there's just all kinds of topics. I mean, we cover all aspects, and you get a chance to not only hear from a lot of the specialists and some of the agents around the state, but you also get the chance to get your questions answered by some of the other folks that are there in the chat helping answer those. I stuck my email on there. Robin, if anybody wanted to send me a photo or a question or something later, we'd be happy to take a look at those for you as well. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you well in your gardening.